Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, the Wheel of Jobs decided that we play Reaper on a Monday evening. There was quite a high concentration of kill tests this time around, but let's just say that the other duties we did get sort of made up for that. For duty 1, we went to Watch Out for That Eye Guy. Something really odd that happened with the duty pop here was that we actually sat with all 4 players ready to go for a weirdly long time. This also happened to the healer and other DPS, but when we got in, we had no tank. Maybe the tank crashed as the duty was starting or something? That said, a quite nifty little minor thing that can be done here as the tank is pulling the boss all the way up to the edge, making it a little bit more possible to avoid the eye. As a Reaper, there isn't much you can do beyond 1-2-3 combos and maintaining Death's Design. Given the shortness of the fight, it is probably for the best to only extend the debuff if it is just about to run out. For duty 2, we went to Poking Down, a duty where Shadow of Death is barely even worth using, both because of the sheer amount of target switching, but also because of how few hits it takes per enemy, unless of course it is a healer that gets away with healing. It was quite awkward that I often didn't quite have the damage to deal with the healers before they healed themselves up again. Not that it was such a big deal, it is just a kill test after all. For duty 3, we went to Throwing Rocks and Stealing Ranks. As Reaper has an AoE option here, but not the AoE Death's Design, and also no combo finisher, the choice is a bit between AoEing all the goblins or using Shadow of Death on the barricades and focusing that. Of course, Shadow of Death on the barricade and AoEing everything is also an option. Extra funny when you have 2 Reapers here making that same decision. For duty 4, we have Acquaintance Visits, and well, there's not much to say here. I guess setting up Death's Design on the Gobu is handy, but you don't even have an AoE here, so there's not really that much else to say. For duty 5, we went to Alexandria as a 22-minute replacement. Weird. We enter as the group is clearing up to the second boss, so my assumption is that the player that left may have left some time during the first boss perhaps. I wonder what happened. Given what I've seen previously, it is possible the tank soloed a large part of the first boss, which would explain how it took this long to reach the second boss. But that seemed somewhat unlikely to me at least. On the final boss, it is quite interesting that this intermission with the lightning generators, as they individually generate the energy for the boss gauge, a tank is perfectly capable of soloing this part, as long as at least a few of the generators are dealt with swiftly at the start of the intermission. Near the end of the fight, I also had a pretty neat double enshroud into Gluttony into using the Executioner stacks, finishing with a limit break that, apparently, left the boss at 0.1% HP, which I guess is as perfectly close as you can cut it without wasting any of the limit break. For duty 6, we went to Leviathan Extreme, and let me just say this is probably the quote-unquote cleanest Leviathan Extreme you will see in a long time. The tanks figured out grabbing the tail decently quickly, and we managed to get rid of the first set of Sahagins before things went too far sideways. But then the rails go down and the tank slides off immediately. 2 mildly concerning observations already at this point is that the warrior has less max HP than me, so their gear is definitely not as strong as it could be. The other observation is that one of our healers has already climbed to a high amount of debuff stacks. The way this works is that the tail puts a debuff on whoever's tanking it, and whenever someone heals that player with direct healing, such as Cure 1 for instance, they themselves get a stack of a debuff which reduces the range of their actions. At a certain stack count, they also just get effectively completely pacified for a while. Although, in fairness, to reach that stack count, you'd have to almost play right into it, because before reaching that point, you'd certainly have so many stacks you have to be near melee range to heal the tank in the first place. Just before this can become reality, however, both Thalassa, Ren and Ashuna get pushed off the arena. Simultaneously, the wave spumes chase random players around the arena. These blue tethered orbs explode for, I believe, proximity damage after a while, so optimally, we want to be as far away from them as possible when that happens. Normally, we would just have a tank pick them up, but good luck with that in this chaos. I also end up going down while tanking the tail. But we also manage to fully recover again. Well, mostly. Leviathan goes away to do more dashes and takes out both Vedan and Narkin, and while they got back up again, when the arena tips, both of them and Ashuna fall right down again. This leaves us with very few players alive for the Wave-Tooth Sahagin, which must be slain in short order. We do get it down before things get too bad, but it does place down a Dreadstorm, which Thalassa accidentally tiptoes into and dies. We get most of the raid back up again, and Leviathan goes out to do even more dashes that we mostly survive, but the arena tip takes out Ren again and pushes Asuna into the Dreadstorm, taking them out as well. Fortunately, the fight was just about over already, so we wrapped it up nice and quick. To quote Narkin at the end of the fight, "I understand nothing." But GG. Indeed, Narkin. Indeed. But well done. For Duty 7, we're going to the level 100 MSQ trial. Jump to this timestamp if you don't want to see it. That said, we of course went to Interphos, and turns out Steel Stormcast knew me. Hello! It was quite a miracle that we had a red mage in this party, otherwise we would have had many wipe moments. For instance, right at the start, the first Ether Tithe is already when things started going sideways. I'm not sure, but I guess either people weren't sure where the safe spot is meant to be, or they weren't sure how threatening the mechanic was. Looks like a mix, but the queen certainly got the ether she required. Thanks to Aoi, we get most of the players back up, but just as Hayase comes back up, they go down again to legitimate force. By the way, a quick tip on that. When you get raised, remember you have 5 seconds of invulnerability that blocks most damage, but it is removed if you start doing things other than moving around. I am pretty sure Hayase could have survived here if they had waited a moment. Maybe. For now, we managed to recover and stay steady until the Earth Virtual Shift, where both Hayase and Beefier Cone, what an amazing name, gets yoinked by the walls. While Beefier Cone gets back up, they don't get into position for the final wall in time and goes down again. As we make it to Absolute Authority, I elect to use the LB3 we had generated, as we will get another one after this mechanic anyway. The total chaos of Absolute Authority takes out all the 3 other DPS, and Steel Stormcast lives through using Hallowed Ground. The healers elect to raise everyone one by one, so we get to carry the LB onward for later, just in case. And another Ether Tithe comes along to suck up both of the healers again. Also once again, Aoi comes to the rescue. We manage to fully recover again, and as Absolute Authority comes around again, I use LB3 again, of course, and we move on to Phase 2, which gives us yet another LB3. Let's go one more time. In this phase, I also managed to shove in 4 whole Enshrouds for quite an exciting finish. Quite a scary run, but this is why a red mage can be so incredibly helpful in this type of content. For Duty 8, we went to Hostile Hobbies, and aside from the fact I sat in queue for about 18 minutes for this, there isn't that much to say. Actually, there is something to say, which is quite strange, which is... For Duty 9, we went to Friendly Repetitions, and I get the impression the Conjurer is spamming either Guildhest Roulette or enemy parties in particular. That is peculiar. In the previous duty, they were level 10, now level 11, so I guess it kind of maybe makes sense. For Duty 10, we went to M4N, Wicked Thunder. During the 3-fold and 4-fold blast segment, I do just fine on the 3-fold blasts, but as the 4-fold blasts overlap with my 2-minute burst, I goof it up a bit, and both get hit and don't quite nail the burst itself either. My next 2-minute burst with double Enshrouds come up during the 4-clone Shadow Sabbath, which I found a lot easier to handle at the same time, so that burst went much better. This also meant that the 5-fold blasts that followed immediately after were easier to handle as my rotation wasn't going crazy during it. I also finish up the final Desperation phase with sort of a triple Enshroud situation. A challenge while learning Reaper is certainly to make sure you spend your Shroud gauge so you don't sit on all of it, while also keeping enough for double Enshrouds where it makes sense, but also while making sure you don't Enshroud on top of other things. And because of the cooldown of Enshroud, there's also a time frame where you really want to make sure you don't Enshroud so it isn't on cooldown. Or you're already like halfway through it as the 2-minute burst is meant to start. Things like that. Of course, double Enshrouds are not required when starting the job, but it is something you can optimize with. And finally for Duty 11, we went to Ramuh Extreme as our 1-minute replacement, and this, well... this might be the worst Ramuh Extreme I've ever been a part of, aside from those where it didn't even go anywhere, of course. Narken from the Leviathan Extreme earlier is also here. Just in this first pull, what is immediately clear to me is that several players have no idea how the orbs work, and both tanks are included in that tally, so that is a concerning situation. As there is no control over Ramuh, and he just mows through everyone with the tank busters, we wipe out gradually. Raspberry reacted on being told to get 3 orbs quite quickly, but did not understand that exactly 3 was the answer, and it wasn't about having 3 stacks of something as the end result. Immediately after the wipe, Raspberry pulls again, but is far too slow to pick up orbs. In my desperation, I realize I'm tanking now, so I, the Reaper, grab 3 orbs and somehow tank decently well. And it requires me to ask for a tank to actually grab orbs before Raspberry tries again, but ends up horrified out in the water. As my buff runs out, I die in my attempt to grab more. I then ask not to pull, but it turns out that Imelda does not speak a lick of English, and just pulls. So I pull out Google Translate and try my best. Not all of what I end up saying makes perfect sense there, but once we finally got both tanks to stop moving, I go over the whole orb thing for Raspberry. After the explanation, we go for attempt 3, and Raspberry is way too slow to grab orbs again. It turns out, as I discover later, that Raspberry thought they were meant to try and make sure they had the buff just before the tank buster lands or something like that, rather than just maintain it. Either way you slice it, however, they still didn't quite get it. This is also the pull where I start to feel like our second tank, Imelda, is more like a chaos agent. Either they are incredibly confused and consistently, accidentally messes things up for the rest of the raid, like some sort of Final Fantasy Mr. Bean, or they are deliberately messing with the raid. I cannot say, and just for anyone wondering about this one, I did multiple times consider voting to kick them over this nonsense, but I had some hope, and so we kept trying. After this wipe, I decide to go extra hard on the German Google Translate to try and explain to Imelda. I ask if they speak English, explain that they're a crucial part of the team and this fight may not be beatable without them. I also mention that I'm aware riding on controllers hard. They finally respond that they were grabbing orbs, but if some of you paid close attention, you'd notice them walk up to and look at the orbs and not actually grab them. After we go over the plan a bit again in German, and I even explain they need to grab orbs second, we try attempt 4. And now, both tanks grab 2 orbs each, leaving neither with 3. At this point, I've given up on trying to get Imelda to play ball, so I explain the solo tank strategy, as 2 of our DPS leave. So, here's a funny little thing about Ramuh Extreme. The red debuff when you overstuff yourself with orbs reduces healing magic potency. Some of the more regular viewers of this channel may already recognize why that is really important. Both of our healers are barrier healers, with access to Lustrate and Ryojole respectively, and Cardia is also ability healing. So we could simply have Raspberry do all the tanking and just gradually maintain the debuff 1 orb at a time. This way, Imelda is no longer a necessary part of the equation. I also explain the importance of rushing to get orbs to Raspberry, and we get 2 new DPS. Milesa actually speaks German, so they offer to explain the things to Imelda after this pull. In the meantime, we try a 5th time. And despite everything, Raspberry still insists on getting maximum orbness. As things spiral out of control, I also try to involve Imelda again, letting them know to provoke, and they eventually get around to it, but also demonstrate they have no clue about the orbs. And because both tanks have decided they must have all the orbs, there are none left over for the rest of the raid to deal with tethers. As we wipe up, it turns out Raspberry thought the orbs prevented Thunderstrike entirely, so we try to explain things again, with Milesa explaining in German separately. Despite Milesa's attempts though, at this point, if I didn't know better, Imelda went AFK and it's their younger sibling playing now, or whatever, who even knows? For attempt 6, they once again grab precisely 2 orbs, making Raspberry's job very difficult. I am so at a loss for words that I just give up and let the wipe happen here. For attempt 7, Imelda finally leaves the orbs alone, so Raspberry can get theirs. And this is when we attempt to make use of the solo tanking strategy. but it is hard on the healers. As Raspberry goes down, I do see Imelda have the debuff, so they could tank, but instead of doing anything helpful, they're just walking around in the water at the edge of the arena doing nothing. For attempt 8, Raspberry manages to get 3 orbs again. In fact, we somehow make it all the way past the ad phase with some awkward points here and there. But when the tethers appear, they manage to rip through us, as when one of the players with the tether dies, it just leaps to a new player and continues, which has a tendency to snowball out of control, just like here. For attempt 9, once again, Imelda steals 2 orbs, which causes way too much chaos, wiping us out again. For attempt 10, Raspberry misses the 3rd orb again. Meleza tries to explain to Imelda again to leave the orbs alone on pole. For attempt 11, Raspberry gets their buff. And then Imelda randomly decides to provoke just before the tank buster lands. This was when I truly started to believe this might be deliberate. We're also running low on time, but let's finally check attempt 12 in full. We start with Raspberry getting their 3 orbs. They actually get 4, but okay, whatever. As Raspberry ultimately only needs 1 orb about every 50 seconds or so to maintain this, we end up starting to accumulate a lot of orbs, and the more orbs there are, the more the blue circles hurt, so some of us start to maintain a lower orb count. We reach the ad phase with no deaths, and Raspberry perfectly maintains their debuff. The ad phase does take a while, so they have to maintain their debuff twice throughout, but as no one is dead, we can easily manage the DPS check of this phase. As very few orbs are needed to maintain this state, we have plenty to spare for tethers. As the first tether hits Meleza, who certainly knows what to do, this gets resolved easily. However, due to the orb count and various other things happening at once, Raspberry goes down. Imelda also goes down, second in enmity, but that gives Raspberry time to get up. While Ramuh chews through the top DPS, first Jen, then me, Raspberry gets new orbs and provokes, and we start to recover again. A new tether appears, and it is on Imelda and never mind, it is on Ira instead, who does know what to do with it. Races come out, and we finish with a mage LB. In hindsight of all of this, I think we probably should have considered vote-kicking Imelda. They were not working with the group, and were hardly communicating either. I'm pretty alright with carrying someone through who just isn't great, but this particular group I felt would have done better as 7 players if Imelda simply wasn't there, which is disastrous. I will say though, super well done by everyone else. Whew. And me who just wanted a few more duties because the first 10 weren't super exciting. I certainly got what I wished for. That said, the Wheel of Jobs is slowly getting finished, now with only 6 DPS and 1 healer remaining. We still have over 80% chance of getting a DPS. We're also closing in on the big 600 Mentor Roulettes. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, neither Harp nor Harvest Moon generated any soul gauge, so technically, both spells were a loss on gauge, but they were also the only ranged options you really had aside from Communio. Despite the more melee-looking appearance of it, Perfectio is actually also a ranged attack.